Multiple Citizens Assembly on Housing in Europe. Today we are joined by Mr. Ilias Nikolaidis, Content Director at the Dianeosis, a Greek Research and Policy Institute. Mr. Nikolaidis, first of all, thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you could start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit more about the Dianeosis and why housing has become one of your areas of focus.
Yes. I work as a content director at Dianeosis. Dianeosis is an independent non-profit think tank. It launched in 2016. Back then, Greece was deeper in the economic crisis of the previous decade. Over these almost 10 years of operation, we have published studies on the Greek economy and society on a wide range of topics. And each of our studies aim to contribute policy proposals for the most pressing issues of our time, such as climate change, the demographic challenges, the economy, digital transformation, and so on. Our focus is on Greece, and we claim to be, and we think we've done that. We claim to be very open. All of our activities public. We publish anything we do, and independent in the sense that we don't receive funding either from state or from other than our single donor. So why housing? During our operation, we have run several public opinion surveys. The most known of which is What Greeks Believe, which show that the Greek public shows some concern for access to affordable housing. So it was very obvious that this is a social issue that is of interest for many people, and also the official statistics show that we're an outlier in so many ways in the housing cost. It's an issue that is tied to the Greek economy and its paradigm. It has very much to do with how it has evolved and with its chronic inconsistencies. I think that we may have the chance to discuss later, and it's also tangent to other challenges that concern us. It's very interesting policy-wise. What can one do to tackle the issue? And it's also very relevant to climate change. So this is pretty much the scope.
Thank you. You already kind of mentioned it already, but we also read at your article at the Dianeosis that Greece has become one of Europe's most expensive housing markets relative to income. What do you see as the main turning points that led to this situation?
It was a long-form article that was published back in 2023. Some things have changed since then, but not very much, not something really bold. The turning points. It would be very inconsistent to miss the economic crisis of the previous decade. There was a very significant drop of income for households. In terms of purchasing power or disposable income, it's something around 40% from 2009 to 2014. After the crisis, there was this very significant inflation wave after COVID and the war in Ukraine. On the other hand, property prices dropped, and this attracted demand from abroad, which took many forms. One of the most discussed forms of this was short-term rentals, but it wasn't just this. There was increased demand for properties to invest to and to many other such schemes. So. And many of these were also related to tourism. Golden visa is also part of this demand from abroad and how it substantiated. And at the same time, the global assets market and the property market were pretty much rising. So there was also, all these factors sort of interplayed. Because of the crisis, of course, Construction slowed in the country, so we had less supply of new dwellings and also because of the climate crisis, we can't be too generous in building. So that's one part of the story. The other part is that Greece traditionally had a very weak housing policy. There were not in place too many or too ambitious schemes to promote access to affordable housing. And it became even weaker after 2012, where the main agency within the Greek government, the OEK, the Workers' Housing Organization, shut down. And until very recently, like 2 or 3 years ago, nothing was pretty much in place to assist access to affordable housing, partly because the prices were low, but the prices started rising because of the demand. So this is pretty much the image, and one also has to mention that it disproportionately affects younger tenants, younger households in urban areas.
And how would you say that Greece's housing situation compare with other European countries? Have similar affordability crises emerged elsewhere, and how have they been addressed?
Well, some of the problems are indeed common. For example, the gig economy with short-term rentals, the golden visa schemes, they're present elsewhere in Europe. And we indeed see a rise in housing. The European Commission is now pressing some very bold measures, proposing. So yes, we see some of these problems interplay and being tackled in different countries, especially in the European context. Yet Greece remains an outlier.
And are there best practices or examples from other European countries that could inspire policies in Greece, or vice versa, to make housing more affordable and inclusive?
Yeah, so one, I think it would be good to mention how we mean an outlier, because in the official statistics by Eurostat, Greek households spend around 35 to 37 to 34, this sort of ballpark of their income for housing. Whereas the EU average is 19%, 18, 20, this sort of area. So there's a big gap, and there is also a big gap, but to the next, which are I think the Nordic countries, which are around 26%, which is still 10 percentage points below Greece. So the severity of the problem is different here. We cannot say that we will import something from abroad. And then housing policies are also different. The tradition is very different. And also how our cities were built were really different from what's happening abroad, especially in Europe. So Austria, for example, is mentioned as a very good example of a very effective and efficient housing policy. But if one zooms closer, if one focuses on how Austria does it, for example, it's very different from what could be done in Greece. For example, in Austria, 1 out of 5 housing units are social housing rental units. We all understand how it's very difficult that this happens in a country like Greece, where there's not even a scheme or a realistic scheme of social housing rentals. How 1 out of 5 houses could make like a parallel market that it helps drop prices in the actual market. So this is pretty much great that it happens somewhere, but it's really a tradition of a century or more in Austria, and it also emerged out of very different circumstances. It emerged because industry had to find ways to keep workers staying close and relatively happy so that they could work. So it emerged very differently, and it has also sparked very different institutions. Like the municipalities are very active, which in Greece, in most places in Greece at least, we understand that this cannot be the case. There are cooperatives, non-profit or for-profit, which we also don't have a tradition in Greece. So I'm afraid that there is no shortcut, there is no silver bullet. One should design things with an open mind. Of course, one should look at how different countries tackle similar problems, but it's very difficult to find a silver bullet.
Given the links between housing and social cohesion, how can housing policy also promote more inclusive and mixed communities, rather than segregation or ghettoization?
Yeah, I think since I was very dismissive in my previous answer, I think one should look at the example of France. Housing policy in France started off as building huge units in the outskirts of big cities where the most need for social housing was. And these units, like in the 1960s and 1970s, post-war, and these units sort of turned a bit into ghettos. They were so big that no one would approach these. But after the 1990s, they shifted their policy in social housing, and they sort of started. They started using and turning into social housing units, or even building social housing units, blocks of apartment within the city. So it was much more mixed with the life of the city. So and actually France is one of the few countries where from the 90s onwards, I think that social housing capacity has increased. So that's a good example on how one could tackle this.
You already mentioned it, that short-term rentals often get blamed for housing shortages. So in your view, how should policymakers balance regulating such platforms like Airbnb with tackling deeper issues, such as low incomes and limited housing supply?
Of course, when we tackle deeper issues such as low income, we get all sorts of benefits, but it's not that easy, and of course, it's not something one could do with a decision. It's not something one can decide, and it would happen magically. However, we have kind of mixed evidence on how important how important short-term rentals are, and the corresponding platforms such as Airbnb or Booking, etc. We know that they are important. We know that they are particularly important in very well-defined geographically areas, but exactly how important they are and whether some very strict measure would undo a situation, it's still unclear. So evidence is mixed. I think what we see as a backlash to these sort of platforms is mainly because they are very visible in areas where problems are severe. But I'm not really sure whether being very bold on how to tackle this thing would be effective in a way that increasing supply would be. I don't know, when we have different options, what would be the best one. And one has also to mention that there are also positive sides of short-term rentals. They give, for example, many buildings were made more energy efficient because of the extra income that this sort of renting houses or anything brought. So I'm not sure whether something that will be disrupting Of course, there need to be limitations. Of course, there need to be more measures than the one in place right now. But in terms of public discourse, the image is more mixed.
Based on your research and your upcoming report with the Foundation of Economic and Industrial Research, what key solutions or policy recommendations would you propose, both for Greece and for Europe? What would a modern and effective housing policy look like in practice?
Well, it's super ambitious for me to talk about solutions for whole Europe, but especially for Greece, there are three directions one could take. Not three directions, one or the other, that all of them would make some sort of comprehensive plan. The first one is tax incentives for owners who prefer the traditional market to the gig economy. I think it's underexplored right now. I think we usually get to banning things rather than incentivizing people. The other thing would be modification to the Golden Visa, so that these resources, which are present and we want them in the country, head to more productive sectors than real estate. It's difficult, but I think it's worth shifting from real estate, which is a very marginally productive activity, to something that is more productive and to something that would have a multiplier impact for the Greek economy. And then I think the most important and the more key one is restarting housing policy, not just with measures. We've had measures the last few years, and some of them were effective and some of them were popular and whatever, people got them. But we need something more coherent, more comprehensive and more bold. After 2012, when NOAC shut down, there is a very urgent need for establishing like sort of a muscle, an agency within the state that runs this sort of programs, that employs urban planners, economists, that oversees such activity, and that its aim is to find the correct paradigm, and it's not just a discussion whether it should be the state or private sector or a combination of both. It's about like imagining how life in cities should be.
I don't know if you want to add anything, or you think you have left anything out of this discussion?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much covered. I don't know.
Okay, so thank you once again for sharing your insights.
Pleasure.
I think you have provided valuable input for our participants in order to work together on suggesting fairer and more inclusive housing policies across Europe.
Thank you. I hope it's been helpful.